Thank you. I might avoid this if that's okay, because I'll get trapped behind it and I'll start holding on to it for dear life. I don't want to do that. If you don't mind, if we could just take a moment of silence to send our love and our care to those we lost, to their family, and to their friends and their loved ones in Manchester. Thank you. A message was sent, or was attempted to be sent last night that centered on fear and trying to spread fear. And it's a familiar story. It's a story that history has told many, many times. I kind of want to tell you some of the stories of how I grew up, understanding fear, coming to know fear, seeing fear being utilized for power, the fear of my own. And I want to do it through story because that's kind of what I do for a living, is story. And maybe we'll start to talk a little bit about story. And at a certain point, I know I'm supposed to answer questions, but I kind of want to ask you a couple of things as well. But my story that I want to share first is a little bit about how afraid I was to even open my mouth as a kid, to even be seen as a little kid. It starts in San Antonio, Texas, when I was in kindergarten. And my mom brought me into school for the very, very first time, and I'll never forget walking into that classroom. It's filled with kids, probably twice as many kids as are here, because it was Texas public education. And this was a kindergarten classroom, and they all had these little, like drawings of animals that they were being asked to color in with various colors. And I saw some kids using quite appropriate colors, some using not so appropriate colors, some staying in the lines, some going outside of the lines. I had no idea what the rules were. That was very upsetting to me. I didn't like all the eyes on me, and I set in on a panic attack. I was horribly afraid of being in this room with these kids. And I was sent to the principal's office. Now, in Texas, you go to the principal's office. Well, I met a woman who had giant Texas hair sprayed way up. She had these giant fingernails. And my job for the next 2 years, because I couldn't be around other kids, I wouldn't even be able to open my mouth to say a word around other kids, what I did was listen for her walkie-talkie to go off, watch her grab this paddle that was on the wall that had holes drilled in it, and I would follow her from classroom to classroom as she found kids who had broken the rules. They'd walk out, look of fear in their eyes. She'd tell them to bend over, and in classic Texas fashion, she would paddle them, that paddle screaming louder than they were. And I looked at her and I thought, my God, that is what a leader is, right? That's right. That big hair, those fingernails, she was scary as hell. And I knew I didn't have it in me to ever be anything like her. I knew it. But all of a sudden I'm learning what fear is. Fear is leadership. Fear is how you get people to do what you need them to do. And then in church, I heard a similar message. So on top of growing up Texan, I also grew up in the Mormon church. Does anybody know anything about the Mormon church in here? You seen Book of Mormon? It's incredibly accurate, actually, right? I laughed the entire way through it, but even the Mormon church has put an ad in the back which tells you just about how accurate it is. And I remember on one certain Sunday, it's a very special Sunday, I was probably only 6 or 7 years old, and they beamed in the prophet of the Mormon church from Salt Lake City, Utah. His name was Spencer W. Kimball. He had white hair, very, very old. And I'm sitting there watching him in awe, being beamed in via satellite, and he says these words. He says, next to the sin of murder comes the sin of sexual impurity, homosexuality. And I lit up. I mean, this was a family, a close family. We played Scrabble all the time. Here was this new word. It had like 6, 7 syllables. It had consonants and vowels, and it even had an X in it, and we all know how valuable that is in Scrabble, right? So I was incredibly excited by this new word. I just had absolutely no fucking clue what it meant. Until one day it slipped out of my mouth. And I was surrounded by these Relief Society women. And the Relief Society is the women's group in the Mormon church. And they all have their dresses hemmed right down to the ground. And when I said that word, you could hear a pin drop. And they called over one of the priesthood holders, and the priesthood holder came to me and said, let me tell you what this word means. And he explained it to me in some serious detail. And I lit up again inside because I thought, boy, now I understand why I have a crush on that boy down that street and not the girl. And I had like maybe a little glimmer of hope for half a second before he clarified that if I ever dared go there, and I had no idea at the time what that meant, now I do, but if I ever did go there, that I would bring great shame to myself and to my family, that I'd be destined for hell. And I was afraid. I was scared. That's not something I wanted to do to myself or to my family. And I shrank and I hid. And if it wasn't bad enough to be hearing messages of fear from my leaders in school and in church, you just had to turn on the TV at the time and listen to the political leaders. There was this really gorgeous gal named Anita Bryant who had been a failed beauty pageant queen. And she decided she was going to go on a campaign across the United States of America saying, "Save the children from homosexuals." Right? Took that campaign from sea to sea, saying that just knowing that there were gay people, just allowing gay and lesbian people to have homes and to have jobs, somehow just knowing that LGBT people exist threatened children. And this idea wasn't some right-wing, far-flung idea. This idea got copied in all 50 states in the country in one way or another, and people showed up for it from both sides of the aisle, progressive and conservative. It was hot, it was fire. People would actually show up for it. And we were losing across the country. So I'd heard the voice from school, from my family, from church, from my politicians. I knew I was less than. I knew I was going to hell. I knew I'd have no right to have a job or to have a home in the future if anybody ever found out. And I shrank and I hid, and I ended up, by my tweens, I had one friend, and his name was Troy. And good old Troy, his mom bought him the sort of used corduroys that were often green from the secondhand shop. And if they tore on the knee, she'd put a little patch and iron it right onto the knee. And he didn't have many friends. He probably just had me. But he invited me over to his house. And in Texas, I went to his house. And in Texas, he had something quite valuable, which was this above-ground pool, right? Filled it up with water in the summer. We jumped in. I could tell something was bothering Troy, though, because he wasn't talking much. And I started pushing. I was like, well, what is it? What is it? What's on your mind? And he finally did something. He told me something that he'd never told anybody before. He came out to me in a way, but he came out to me as Jewish. I had never heard of a Jewish before, but I knew it wasn't a Christian. And I knew we were living in a Christian town that was filled with mostly Southern Baptists. I was already different enough as a Mormon. That was way too different to be a Jewish, whatever that is. So I started trying to talk him out of it, saying, I think you can change that. I don't think you have to be that. Tried really hard to convince him that's going to be too different. You're going to have all these troubles. Let's work on that. And you know what? It didn't work. I couldn't convince him. But I had become that guy convincing him that his difference was just too different and he ought to be afraid of it. And by the end of that day, I had 0 friends. No friends. And I did shrink and I did hide and I did stop trying to excel because I didn't want to stick out. And in that isolation, I started to become depressed. And I started to consider things, dire solutions to my problem. And that shouldn't be surprising. In the United States today, LGBT kids are still 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than their straight brothers and sisters. And 9 times more likely if they come from unaccepting environments. Right? So lives are at stake when we lead with fear. Lives are at stake when we fear difference. But that's not how my story ended, because of a turn of luck. You see, my mom, good Mormon mom, with her dress hemmed down to the floor, on her braces and her crutches, because she was paralyzed from polio from a young age. But she never broke the rules. She followed all of the rules, and she'd somehow gotten a job in the U.S. military and was succeeding by following the rules precisely, exactly. Well, something happened to her. She fell in love at 40 years old with this much younger military army soldier who had orders to ship off to California. And she put her 3 boys and our cat into our Malibu Classic, which is like this giant tank of a car, right? Filled it up with gas and drove us to California to chase after this 19, 20-year-old Army soldier. Apple does not fall far from the tree. Sorry, Tom. And my mom, I saw her start to open up. I saw her in love, genuinely in love, not love in the service of God, not love in the service of salvation or to follow the rules or to do the right thing, but in love for the very first time. And she started to shine, she started to glow, and she started to notice in me that I was a bit too quiet, that I was becoming isolated, that there was something that was probably wrong that I wasn't telling her. And she thought, I need to break him of this shyness problem. And she said, well, the way to do that, most likely, to break you of a shyness problem is to do what? Let's put him into drama club. And so she put me into the theater club in school, and not surprisingly, I liked it. I liked it a lot. And I started to see people in there that I thought, they might be a little bit like me. That person might be a little bit like me too. And over the course of just a couple of years, I went from a little drama club in school all the way to working and apprenticing in some of the professional theaters in the Central Coast in the Bay Area, up near San Francisco. And one day, another little piece of magic happened, another little turn of luck. I had a director, a theater director there who I was apprenticing under. And he was my hero. He put me through all the different parts of and pieces of and areas that build a show, lighting and props. He wanted us to know everything there was to know about the theater, everything there was to know about everything. And he had a little gaggle of us who were studying under him. And at one point, he brought a cassette tape to our little meeting. And I don't know if somebody had said something homophobic, or if he just saw in some of us that we might needed to hear this, or if it was just a moment he thought we could use a little hope, because this is a time when everybody around us was dying of AIDS. But he put in a cassette into this player, and I want to read you what I heard off of that cassette. It was a speech. It was a speech that was given 10 years prior to that. And it was a speech given in San Antonio, Texas, the town I just left. And the voice said this, if you bear with me. Somewhere in Des Moines or San Antonio, there is a young gay person who all of a sudden realizes that he or she is gay, knows that if the parent finds out, they'll be tossed out of the house, their classmates will taunt them, and the Anita Bryants are doing their bit on TV, and that child has several options: to stay in the closet, suicide. And then one day that child might open up the paper and it says homosexual elected in San Francisco. And now there are two new options: to go to California, which is what my mom did, or to stay in San Antonio and fight. And you've got to elect gay people so that thousands upon thousands, like that child, know that there is hope for a better world, that there is hope for a better tomorrow. And when I heard that speech, it was the very first time in my life that I heard someone leading with hope and not fear. And his brand of hope actually included me. 10 years after his assassination, this man, Harvey Bernard Milk, gave me hope and saved my life. Now, it wasn't enough for me to come flying out of the closet and call my good mom and military mom and say, hey, I'm gay, and beg for acceptance. But it was enough to get me going out to what at the time were these sort of vibrant gay ghettos. And there was one in Los Angeles. Has anybody ever been out to Los Angeles here? All right, there's a place called West Hollywood. And I started going out there, and it wasn't like the safe haven that it is today. You know, you still had to go with your friends, walk together to your car so you didn't get bashed. You still heard some things being said from the people driving through West Hollywood, but it was safe enough. And I was meeting people a lot like me, and they didn't have the horns the Mormon prophet had said they were going to have. And I got to say, they didn't seem all that depressed, particularly if there was a good mix and Madonna was a part of it. They seemed downright fabulous. And I started having a really good time. And I started meeting some cute gay guys from like some of the universities around, including one who was this older guy, much, much older. He was 22 years old and a graduate student. And I fell desperately in love with him. He just wouldn't give me the time of day. It didn't matter how hard I tried to impress him, the things I invited him to, the things that I tried to talk about, the interest I showed in what he was doing. He just had put me permanently in the friend zone. And it was very, very upsetting to me. And it was all I was kind of thinking about as I got on the plane to go visit my mom and my stepdad and my brothers in their new home in Virginia for Christmas. And I remember being on that plane and thinking, holy crap, what am I gonna talk about at Christmas this year? And we're like a good Southern family, right? We talk all the time. We talk about everything. And all of a sudden, I have no clue what I can talk about because everything that really matters to me is without me. And I wasn't ready to do that. I didn't want to do that. So I land at the airport, and my handsome Army soldier stepdad picks me up, drives me through the woods to the house. There's my mom. She opens the door on her braces and crutches, and she sort of leans forward on them so she can spread her arms wide so that when I get to her, she can hold me. And she was already upset because I said, I can only come home for 2 days this year, which is very abnormal. I made every excuse and told every lie in the world to my employers, Taco Bell, Target, JCPenney's, so I could be home for like a week or two. Here I had 2 days, and that was the plan, to say as little as I could, to race through it, to claim exhaustion. And so as my mom held out her arms and she held me at the door, already starting to tear up, I just wondered, would she hold me like that if she knew? And so I just raced through our Christmas dinner. I raced through opening presents. And I went upstairs and I said, I'm tired. I got to get back on a plane tomorrow. This has been great, but I'll see you in the morning. And I'll never forget, I was packing and I heard this sound coming, this click-clack sound coming down the hallway, click-clack, click-clack, click-clack. I'd heard it my entire life. It is my mom on her braces and her crutches, and she's coming towards the door. And I hold my breath hoping she's going to veer off to my little brother's room. No such luck. The knock comes to the door. I don't want to answer it. I'm silent. She knocks again. I know she can see the light coming out from under it, so I let her in. And she comes in, sits down on the bed, and she puts her braces down, her crutches down, how she always did. And I'm not saying much. I'm just pretending to continually pack. What? I don't know. Folding things like I never have and never will, just to sort of cover up the silence. But she feels it, because we always talk. So she feels it with the news of the day. And at the time in the United States, there was this thing in the news called Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Has anybody ever heard of that? So Don't Ask, Don't Tell, for those who haven't, said, as long as we won't ask you if you're gay, if you don't tell us if you're gay, and you can actually participate in the military, which is supposedly this step forward that didn't make any sense to a single LGBT person anywhere. It meant that we had to hide and live in shame, and if we were discovered, we'd be kicked out. But to my mom, she was furious about it because it actually created a pathway for LGBT people to be in her military. These broken people, these ruined people, these evil people, these people who are destined for hell were going to be in the military she'd fought so hard to be a part of, she'd worked so hard in, and I'm not saying anything, so she just keeps escalating and escalating, getting more vehement in her arguments that this law was wrong, that LGBT people should not be allowed in her military. And she takes my silence as agreement, but really I'm sitting there and I am praying. I don't even know to who, but I'm praying for the tears to stay in my eyes. I'm praying that that burning sensation goes away because I didn't want to come out. I wasn't ready to come out. I wasn't ready to lose my family over this. And then I felt it. I felt the water in my eyes. I felt that first tear betray me and streak down my face. And then I heard nothing. Then it was silence in that room. And I knew she's a good Southern mom. She knew. She didn't need the words. She understood. And it took some time for me to get the courage to look up into her eyes again. And that was confirmation for her. And not much was said. She asked, at one point, she said, why? Through her own, brimming tears. And I said, why what? And she said, why would you choose this? And I could see her heart was breaking for me. And I looked at her, and then I looked at her braces and her crutches. And all I could say was, why did you choose those? And we didn't say anything else. We didn't fix anything on that trip. I went home with both of us thinking we were losing each other to our very divided Americas and our very divided belief systems that were going further and further apart as we became more and more different. And I got lost in a little something that distracted me for a bit. I had one teacher. She was an editing professor who had just come into UCLA's film school. I was at UCLA's film school at this point, feeling incredibly proud of myself. And she had come in, and she decided she was going to teach us this class by having us actually edit on celluloid. Does anyone do film in here? Or even for fun, like YouTube stuff. Like, you don't edit on actual film anymore, and you didn't do it back then that way either, so we were already very curious, but it's what she wanted to do. And then at the end of this quarter, she posted the grades. And let me tell you something. To get into UCLA's film school is probably a little bit like getting in here. You've never seen a B, right? You don't know what that is. That's a scary thing. A C or a D, forget about it. That's terror. Well, she posted the grades, and there were B's and C's, lots of them, and D's. And people started freaking out in our class. And some of these people were headed to graduate school. They were looking for scholarships. This had real ramifications. And so they all turned to me, the cute, sweet, didn't cause any trouble one, who sat in the corner and did everything as he was told, and said, you have to go talk to her. She'll listen to you. And so I got up the courage, after I was peer pressured into it, to go see this professor. And I sat with her, and I made the appointment, went in, said, listen, what we need is at least an explanation, a review of the film that we did and edited. Maybe a test or something you graded, a paper, any sort of grade, any kind of explanation of where this came from. And she turned red in the face, and she said, I am calling you in to be expelled from UCLA Film School for grade coercion. And I was terrified. I mean, I'd really never been in trouble in my life. I had been so quiet, and all of a sudden I'm being called in for grade coercion. So a week goes by, a week of terror for me. I go in to the dean's office, and it's the dean of the film school, a couple of the other professors who I really admired, and this professor, and she's sitting there. She gets to go first. The dean says, go ahead, and she talks about how I came into the office and I demanded explanations that she did not have to give, and said that I was coercing a grade out of her that she didn't feel she had to give. And he said, well, that is bad. The dean said, that's not good. Lance, what is your response to this? And I said, well, I just would say, I would like to know what grade it is that she thinks I wanted. And she said, with venom, you wanted an A. I said, okay, that's probably true. Now, what grade is it that you gave me? And she was a little stunned, and she stopped, and she waited for a second, and then all her preparation to sort of grill me and get me kicked out of film school, she'd forgotten to do one thing, which is to check the grades, and she opened up her little ledger. She turned bright red in the face. She stood up and said, you're all a pack of hungry jackals. And she left the room because she had given me the only A. And the dean came over and put his arm around me and started laughing and just said, oh my gosh, I love you. I said, why? And he said, because you're a troublemaker. I had literally never heard that word used about me in my entire life. And it might have been one of the best moments of my life. I loved it. I was a troublemaker. And I was going to own that from then on out. And if any of you, if I'm ever so lucky as to work with any of you and pay you from my company today, or you watch one of my movies at the end, you're going to get a check from Hungry Jackal Productions. And it's going to say Hungry Jackal Productions at the very end. And I was so pleased with how that turned out that I forgot that graduation was coming up, or I just tuned out the fact that my mom was coming to visit for graduation. And I heard that familiar click-clack sound coming down the hallway this time of my apartment complex near UCLA. And I have to admit, I copped out. I had not told my friends that my mom was homophobic. It was too shameful to me that she had rejected me. I was so close to my mom. I loved my mom. This was a difficult thing for me. I also had copped out not telling her that so many of my friends and my roommates' friends were now gay and lesbian. And we were throwing a big dinner party thanks to my college roommate, where we were cooking up some pasta and some salad, right? And so she comes over. There's all these gay and lesbian people in the living room. I'm a little terrified, but I'm not going to address it. I'm just going to go focus on the sort of jar of pasta that I'm going to heat up and pretend to have made. I'm going to heat up the pasta. I'm going to get the salads going. I'm going to let whoever needs to talk to her or not. It's none of my business. Until I realize that because I've said nothing, all of these people assume that my mother loves her gay son. And this is like before Will and Grace. This is before Ellen came out. So to my friends, she's a goddamn saint. And so they all want their turn talking to this saintly Southern mom who accepts her gay son about their gay experience, right? Their experience with their families, how they were rejected, some of them kicked out of their homes, were having to turn to organizations to pay for their college. And she's a good Southern mom, so she's not going to get confrontational. She's just going to nod you to death. Yeah. And so they are thinking, wow, she's really getting into this. She's really a good listener. So I'll start to talk to them about my personal life. And I'll start to talk to them about this good Southern mom about my sex life. And I'm watching from afar, realizing what's going on, and I'm terrified. And the room starts to empty out, and people start to go home. And pretty soon I realize it's just going to be me and her. I'm getting scared again just thinking about it. And my roommate dashes to his room, and we are left alone. And my mom, in her good, genteel Southern way, pats the edge of the fold-out bed that I'd called my own for years at that point. She wants me to come sit down, and I go over and I sit down next to her. And she says, well, I met your friends. I said, yes. She's like, I liked them. They're very interesting. I said, okay, Mom. She said, well, I met one in particular. He's a 22-year-old graduate student who I think you know. I said, yes, I know the one. I know him well. And she said, well, I had a good talk with him, and I told him that I think he ought to start treating you a little bit better. And the next time you two go out, maybe he ought to pay. And she looked me in the eyes, and she started to tear up, and she wrapped her arms around me, and she held me so incredibly tight. And that was the first moment my mom held me, knowing who I was fully, loving me for who I am without question. And how did it happen? It didn't happen because my friends came into that room and they started debating politics or policy or law or the Constitution or science, no matter how right it is. They came to my mom with story, with personal storytelling from their hearts. And that story, those stories were so potent and so powerful that they erased generations of lies and myths and distortions about being an LGBT person. Lies and myths and distortions she'd heard her entire life from the church and from the government and from folks in the South. It was gone that quickly. And that's the power of personal story. And the miracle of that, as I look around this room, is that every single one of you has one of these. And it is equally powerful. It has the power to change hearts, and that is the quickest avenue to the mind. And you change minds, you can start to change a city and a town and a state and a country and the world, starting with personal story. And I thought, boy, if that's the power of personal story, that's what I'm going to dedicate my life to. And so I graduated and I started, if it was a reality TV show, boy, did I do the gay one. If it was a TV movie, it was about Pedro Zamora, who bravely died of AIDS in front of the United States of America on a reality show. If it was a movie, 10 years later, I had the great honor and opportunity to tell the story of Harvey Milk to the world. But in that time, the stakes got turned up. And even with that great success, I felt like I had to do a bit more. Because in California, something called Proposition 8 passed in the same weeks that Milk came to the theaters. And Proposition 8 took away the rights of gay and lesbian people to be married in a state where we already had that right. It took them away. It said that our relationships were unequal, our families worthy of less protection, and it passed. How could that pass? This was only 8 years ago. How could it pass in this time? And it broke my heart and it made me furious. And I not only wanted it gone, I wanted to know how I could be free enough to be married, but also the people living in Texas and Virginia and other states where they never even dared dream that their relationships would be treated equally. How do you do that? So I started doing research, which is so critical to changing the world. And in that research, I discovered that the way to full equality in my country and in many countries is to take it to the federal court. Take it to the federal government. Take it to the largest power you got, not the local one. And I thought, I want to follow in those fine footsteps. And I got this opportunity to get up on one of the biggest stages there is in the world, on that stage at the Academy Awards. When I accepted that Oscar for writing Milk, I made a promise in that room that day and to the world to bring full federal equality back to the state of California and to the country. It was bold. It was optimistic. It might have been a little foolish, like most optimism is. It wasn't realistic. And I got off that stage and I caught hell, grief, and not from, a bunch of conservative people. I got grief from my own. That's one of the big lessons about pushing into the future, about creating progress, about doing anything new. You're probably not going to get a lot of hell from the people who you think are going to oppose you. It's going to be from your heroes and your teachers and your best friends, because we're all feeling our way through the dark when it comes to making progress. There is no one way. We've never been there before. We don't know how to get there. And I was scared. My heroes were telling me that my arrogance and foolishness was going to set us back and create a backlash. So I went to a guy named Julian Bond. Now, Julian Bond had worked with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. During the fight for black civil rights in the United States of America, and seen much success and had a lot of rocks thrown at him. And I told him what I was going through. And he said this to me. He said, "Good things do not come to those who wait, they come to those who agitate." And I thought, good, because I'm a troublemaker. I can agitate. But I also want to be prepared. So I'd done my research. I was ready to agitate. And now I needed to do something we don't often do in movements. And that's to lose my fear of difference. To reach out to unexpected allies. People who are going to look at this issue very differently than me. And with some other folks who are much smarter than I am, we reached out to some unexpected allies. One of them, his name is Theodore Olson, the most conservative Supreme Court lawyer in the United States of America, the guy who put George W. Bush in the White House. We went to him because we had heard a rumor that he was in favor of marriage equality. And we said to him, we think you could make the conservative case for marriage equality that we can't make. And he had another brilliant idea. He's like, well, let's build a bridge. Let's go beyond the divide. And let me invite the guy whose ass I kicked in Bush v. Gore that got George W. Bush in the White House. Let's invite David Boies to fight this alongside me. And we built that coalition. An unexpected coalition with no fear of difference. And then we utilized that other piece of power that I had learned, which was storytelling. And we found the plaintiffs and the families and the children of these families who had been denied marriage. And we told their story to the country. And we told it from our heart. Yes, constitutional arguments would need to be made in the Supreme Court, but before that, we needed to move the numbers and to show that to the Supreme Court justices. And if you watch what happened in those years, by telling personal story on a national level, we moved the numbers from one where the majority said, no, we don't think gay and lesbian people deserve this, to overwhelming support in the United States of America for marriage equality. And in that courtroom at the Supreme Court, if you've been paying any attention, we kicked Prop 8's ass. We beat it. We ended it. And case after case that followed us, that followed our example, that we worked on and with, a handful of years back now, just two really, we won marriage equality from sea to shining sea in the United States of America by telling story, by reaching out to people who are different than us, by making some trouble when we need to make trouble. And you know who's happiest about it? My agents, because now I can get back to work making movies and making them money. And as irony would have it, after putting aside my film career for half a decade to fight for marriage equality in the United States, I had the great honor, pleasure, and joy of my life come true when I got to get married to the love of my life, who's sitting right back there, but we did it here in your country, who was so far ahead of us. So I want to thank you all for helping make that possible here as well before we were able to achieve it in the United States. You know, it's a funny thing, leadership, and how some people lead with fear. I actually think there's a different way to look at leadership without fear. And it's why I came here today instead of working on the book and the screenplay I'm supposed to, besides the fact that it's a great honor and really intimidating when you look at the list of people who've spoken here before me. But I came here because I think that with knowledge, which you're going to have an abundance of, and the skills you're going to leave here with an abundance of, the life experience, all of that is great. And I think you can run things and manage things, keep things running. But I'm not sure if you can lead with just knowledge. I think the element that you need to lead is passion. And I think when you find that passion, you don't even have to be that good at the thing you want to lead in, because the passion will help you find that, right? Harvey Milk lost 3 times before he ever won. He wasn't that good at running, but his passion kept him in the fight. It kept him going. He learned how to become very, very good at it, right? And where does that passion come from? I'll tell you what, it does not come from. It does not come from how you are similar to the person you're sitting next to. I think, for me, my passion comes from how very different I was as a gay kid, as a shy kid, growing up in a conservative, military, Mormon home in Texas. It came from the magnificent, sometimes frightening ways that I'm different. I say, if you want to find your passion, look to the ways you're unique. Look to the ways you're different. Rip off the shame of those differences. Deny the fear anyone wants to put in your heart about those differences. That is where your passion is, and I want you to lead with it. Because that passion, in conjunction with the knowledge and experience you're gaining here, you can lead humanity into places we've never been yet. In the field of your choice, in the field that you love, you can make this life more livable, more exciting, more fair, more loving. And I'm going to ask you one more thing before I let you ask me anything you want. And it's a selfish thing. It's not for me, but it's for all of us. You're going to be so busy when you leave here with all the power you have in this knowledge, with the power I know you're going to find in your passion. But could you please take a little bit of time in your lives to use some of that power and some of that leadership and some of that passion to build a bridge? Build bridges between yourself and someone else or another people who are very, very different than you. And not because it's charity, and not because it's politically correct, but because it will make you more powerful. And not because you want to change them to be more like you, but that in the combination of your differences, you will solve things differently. You will see things differently. The world will come to life in a different way. And perhaps in building those bridges that I hope you'll build, you'll be able to lead this world into a place that doesn't listen to fear and to hate and to anger, but that loves and thrives, no matter your gender or your gender identity, the color of your skin, the God you pray to, or who you love. Please get out there, use your stories, use your passion, and build bridges. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. You spoke a lot just now about leading with hope, and you spoke about the hope that took you on, still as a young man, hearing Harvey Milk's speech, which you read out to us. Today, we're in an increasingly regressive time, some people would say. There are real divisions coming up. People are building walls more than they're building bridges. What is it that still gives you hope when you're out there campaigning for the principles of equality, of justice, at a time when lots of other people are far happier to build up walls, push others away who aren't, like them?
Well, as much as it's impossible to miss that we are in regressive times, that we have people leading with fear. They are saying, they're trying to fool us into thinking it takes courage and strength to build a wall or to separate one from the other. It also creates opportunity that's to see with clarity all of the people coming out of the woodwork who might have been sitting idle for some time, who are starting to resist, who are saying, this is not okay. I do not believe that this is the future. I do not believe that the future is us versus them. I believe in an underlying we that we can fight for, that will create real progress. And you see that, one example would be, there's an old march chant that we always heard, particularly gay marches, that said, gay, straight, black, white, same struggle, same fight. Sounds good. But you would go to a gay march in the United States, and you would see mostly gay people even when you're hearing that chant. Not a lot of straight folks. You would go to a Black Lives Matter rally in the United States when people are literally fighting for the protection of their lives, and you would mostly see black people. I have to say, in the months following Trump's election now, you go to these rallies. We went to one in Trafalgar Square, walked through that, where I see the ones that are taking place in Los Angeles, in Washington, D.C., in New York, and it truly is starting to look like gay, straight, black, white, and more diversity than that. And in that, there's hope. In that, there's a signal that we're starting to understand the interconnectedness and the power of the us's. I will say my only warning there, and it's something I was worried about when I started doing When We Rise, is we've become so identified with our own minority status in many ways that we've taken ownership of the label, and we've taken ownership of this usness and kind of pulled away. And I worried about it even in our greatest successes in the LGBT movement. As we went up to the steps of the Supreme Court, I thought, we're becoming awfully myopic. And at the end of the day, we're a minority. And our rights can be taken away quite easily. We have no power if we do not understand our interconnectedness. And it's why I wrote When We Rise. Because I said, if Harvey Milk won his office, not by just saying gay people vote for me, but he went and he met with the seniors who were having trouble affording to live in San Francisco. He went to the Chinese community who were being discriminated against at the ballot box, right? And he went to the workers, to the people who drove the shipping trucks and said, I know you're struggling to pay for your talented sons or daughters' educations. And he built an alliance, and that's how he got elected. That's how he pushed rights forward. Well, if we lose that interconnectedness, we have become weak. We've become powerless. And I worried that that's what we were doing. And so I wrote this show as a warning. But I think in the meantime, these voices of division came out, preaching fear, and they won because we were divided. Not out of animus, sometimes out of arrogance, out of our successes. We'd become divided. We'd forgotten about one another. And I think the real key, and the message I want to hear today, is about the beauty of our differences, is about the power of our differences, and particularly this, that every single person in this room, in this country, in the world, is a minority in one way or another. It just depends on how you slice the pie. At the end of the day, we all have an interest in the we, in the us, in the coalition building, in looking out for our neighbors' rights as much as we do our own. And it's why I wrote a show called When We Rise that I hope one day will scream here. And the we being the biggest part of it. That is power, and it's the power to protect ourselves, but more importantly, our neighbors.
Turning to the Supreme Court judgment you mentioned, so after Obergefell, marriage equality is a reality in the US. But in states across the US, there still aren't protections, when it comes to employment or housing for LGBT people. What more needs to be done to catalyse the work there that's happening on a state level to realise parity in these protections and these rights?
Right. Well, we're starting to see arguments get to the federal level, aren't we, about equal access to employment and housing, which is surprising to some, but people are making gender discrimination arguments that have started to win even among some very conservative judges in the United States. So that promises an era perhaps where through the courts LGBT people can win our right to be protected at home and in our jobs through the Constitution, which I think is fantastic. And I hope that happens. I do say, when we talk about employment and housing non-discrimination, I don't think you have to worry about that so much here. You worry about it in the United States. And some people in the gay movement say, well, why are you even so worried about that? Are there really all these people losing their jobs and their homes? And the answer is some. But what those laws really do is keep these families and these people closeted because they're afraid to lose their jobs and they're afraid to lose their homes. And if they're not able to tell their stories and share who they are, what happens? The myths and the lies and the stereotypes about gay people in those areas survive and thrive and go on. And we're not able to dispel them. We're not able to change hearts and to change minds. We can't tell our stories. Really, the lack of protections on housing and employment silence people. And if the power to change is a part of the power of story, that silencing is death. And so that's a problem in the United States. I would say it's a far bigger problem outside of the United States. This country is one of the most progressive in the world on LGBT issues. And I applaud this country for that. It's great to be here and wherever you are politically to see that even conservatives here believe, it seems, in much of LGBT equality. But if you go to places like Indonesia today, where young gay men were caned, to Iran, where men have been hung in public, televised for being gay, to Uganda, where people are murdered, and certainly Chechnya at the moment, where there are concentration camps the world doesn't seem to care about at the moment, filling up with gay men. These are people literally fighting for their lives. There is no place where the power of story needs to be utilized more than in these places right now. And for fear of their own lives, many have become silent. And there are few incredibly brave souls in the countries I just mentioned who are raising their voices. It's incredibly inspiring. It brings me to tears when I see them locked away and drug away, worrying for their lives. And I think it's our responsibility as people living in countries with more freedom and protection, whether you're LGBT or not, to raise your voices and bring your attention to their plight. Their lives are at stake. And the power we have is to shed light, to bring the world's attention to what's happening in these countries, so that they can tell their stories, and when they can't, we will.
Picking up on that, do you think that other high-profile individuals like yourself should be doing more to help share these stories? And do you feel any of them are held back, by the concerns you mentioned earlier of a backlash on their career or for fear of creating controversy?
Some, but I think people who have a high profile, yes, they have a responsibility to their fellow man, right? We're benefiting massively from having a high profile financially. The way you're treated in the world is very, very different. Well, if you're going to reap all those rewards, I hope you can look beyond yourself for just a minute and see that other people are not being treated equally or fairly, that we have a lot further to go when it comes to equality, not just for LGBT people, but for a lot of people in the world right now who are not being treated equally, and to shed light on those stories. I do sometimes, and this is my personal view on this, think that some celebrities go to anger and verbal violence and start to utilize the tools of the enemy, really, when doing combat. And I don't find it helpful. I grew up in the South. I grew up in a conservative world. I know how we react when people come at us with anger. We just batten down the hatches, put up our defenses, and we stop listening. I would hope that some of these people who are in a position to influence can start speaking more from the heart. I think it is the way to create change.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you for that. I've taken up too much of your time now, so let's take a few questions from the audience. If you'd like to ask a question, please wait for the microphone to reach you. It's only a recording microphone, so it will not amplify your voice. Okay, let's go to the hand over there, right by the lamp.
Hi, thanks. That was the most inspiring talk I've ever heard. I was never been so tearful in a talk before, so thank you for that.
This is my aunt, by the way.
Yeah,
On commission, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
hourly rate, so.
Thank you. I'll pay you after.
Yeah.
I know I'm not going to be the only LGBT person in here. I know I'm not going to be the only person that's interested in writing. And the idea of doing what you do for a career is like the astronomical dream for me. How can we get over that seemingly insurmountable first step? Because some people don't know the right people. We don't have a film reel to show people. How can we meet people like you and be like, hey, don't disregard our application, please notice us. What do you think is the best advice for people that are trying to get into screenwriting like you did?
Well, I will say, first and foremost, and Tom will applaud me for this right now because he's been trying to get me to do this for a while, in a very practical way, I just moved to London permanently and I need a staff here, including an assistant and proofreaders and researchers and people who could get involved in creating some of the stories I like to make. So if anybody would like to participate in that insane venture, which occasionally pays off, I'm taking applications. That said, I'm not alone. And you know, persistence is key. Persistence is important. I can only say that every single person who has quote unquote succeeded in getting something done, succeeded in the business, has their own really unique story. You know, and there's not one easy path. I will say writing and documentaries are a great way in because you can do them for basically nothing. So I started shooting documentaries and writing scripts out of UCLA's film school where I graduated top of the class and was waiting tables and serving orange juice for 2 years because that's what the degree gets you. And a great deal of knowledge. It was only because I was producing my own stuff and these little documentaries that I got noticed by a little company you might have heard of out here called the BBC. Because it doesn't cost much money to make the documentaries. It costs very little to enter them in film festivals. And people at film festivals are paying attention because they need new talent. It's particularly at the beginning levels. And so I started working on a TV show called Faking It that the BBC was producing in America on the Learning Channel. All of a sudden, I'm making a little bit of money on these documentaries. I have an agent because they want, 10% of it. And I have a piece of leverage to say, if you want me to stay with you and you want to keep collecting that 10%, you got to read my script. And they didn't want to, I promise you. They really, really didn't. And the good news is that I eventually found my niche. And I'll go one step further about that. Because I feel like the way, if you're a writer or a filmmaker, to make yourself invaluable is to be undeniably you. Because there is no one else like you. So you can go into every single pitch you do and say, I'm the only person in the world to write this and to make this, and here's why. And if you can make that compelling a pitch, they're going to listen. They're even going to find it marketable. Because the most valuable thing in the world is a unique voice, a new point of view. So that also helps. So figuring out ways to get in the door if you don't have the money to self-finance, which Lord knows I didn't, and then I think being so true to your own passion that people find you unique enough that you're marketable, that you're undeniable. But first and foremost, if you're very, very smart and very, very talented, and particularly if you're smarter than I am, which isn't difficult, please come and apply for a job at Hungry Jackal Productions.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's go to the hand there at the end of the row in the green.
Hello, thank you so much for coming. So we are so lucky to have a film like Moonlight come out this year, but quite often we see queer films being incredibly whitewashed. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on how we can bring queer films to become more inclusive, to really have these narratives be brought out.
Yeah, it's a great question with a simple answer. You have to have writers and directors and producers and filmmakers who are also diverse. If you have only white writers and white directors who are just gay and cisgender, that's what you're going to get, because we write what we know for the most part. So for me, putting my production and money where my mouth is, when we did When We Rise, the miniseries, it's why I hired a team of writers and directors who were gay and straight and black and white and men and women, and cast that was LGBTQ, because I knew it, not because it's PC, but because I don't know that experience. I can get to know it as well as I can. I could try and write it, but it got even better once I had like Dee Reese, the second director up in the series, who is a black lesbian. Around the big lunch table one day, she was like, well, this is how lesbians do it. And I never quite knew, and now I do. and she showed me in front of everybody on our cast and crew. And, but it was valuable. It was very valuable. So it's, encouraging Hollywood to be more diverse, putting pressure on the Writers Guild and the Directors Guild to push past the catch-22 of only hiring people with experience, because that's going to continue to be mostly straight white men, and to take those risks and take those chances to hire more diverse writers' rooms, producers, and directors. And you see that evidenced at ABC already, where for the first time in history there is a black woman running a major U.S. network, and she is taking those chances.
Great. Let's have another question. Sure, hand here.
Firstly, have you seen the work of Russell T Davies, things like Queer as Folk or Cucumber?
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
Good. I just wondered if shows like that, which feature a lot of things like the gay community, drugs, Grindr, hookup-ups, and things like that to other people wouldn't seem like good representations of the gay community, but they certainly are real. Do you think that's a good thing to have in TV shows, or do you think it's a good representation of?
Yeah, as long as it's honest and authentic, I don't mind. I don't mind at all. I think it rings false when we try to sanitize our lives. It rings false to straight people when we try and sanitize their lives. They know better. They know they're be just as kinky behind doors as we are. And so, I think, we want to show ourselves in all the ways we are, and there's certainly our LGBT people who are very traditional, and folks who aren't. I am not about, I didn't fight for marriage equality because I thought we needed to become like straight people. I fought for marriage equality because there's a lot of families with kids that need equal protection. But I think gay or straight, that's a personal decision. And if you want to go on Grindr and hook up, that's another personal decision. I just would worry about getting checked into the clinic constantly if you did, but he probably explored that on Cucumber. I watched Queer as Folk more, which I thought was excellent and really innovative at a really critical time. And then they tried to copy it in the United States, and it was not good. Sorry, I know this is being filmed. I'm in a huge amount of trouble now.
Yeah, sure.
I was going to say, what do you think is the difference between the way that the LGBT community is represented in film and TV series in the UK and in the US, if there is a difference?
Well, in every way, UK television is more explicit, particularly on what just comes over the airwaves. I've seen so many penises and vaginas on television since I moved here, in all kinds of situations and states. And it's not something you see on US television. We're very prude about it. You can get cable networks, and they feel like they're being really, experimental and really pushing the envelope. And then you come here and realize that's just on at 9 o'clock anyway. And so, that's gay or straight. There just is, less, seemingly more of a comfort with how people really are here when it comes to depictions on television.
Great. Yeah, let's take another question. At the back of the room.
I can't think of a good question, but I wanted to say something for the record. I'm probably the oldest union member in the room, and you've given one of the finest addresses I've ever heard. I know nothing about movies, I'm not gay, I just wanted to say thank you for
Oh, thank you very much, sir. Thank you for coming.
Great, and let's have another question.
I don't know why we don't just end there.
Yeah, and while we're on a high, yeah, let's go to the hand there by the lamp.
Hi, I just wanted to, you mentioned in the answer to this gentleman here that Hollywood needs to have a more diverse view, but also earlier you mentioned you wanted to build coalitions. Now, my understanding of a lot of the conservative in America is that Hollywood is deemed too liberal for being too diverse, and so on. I'm just wondering, where would you draw your compromise? Like, obviously you don't want to compromise, but to form coalitions, you do. And how would you do that when so much of your stuff is at stake when theirs doesn't seem to be?
That's a really smart and thoughtful question. I mean, let me feel my way through it. TV and film in the United States has many times politically come under fire for being progressive. I think an understanding of how the US democracy is built, for me, exposes some of the flaws in the design. It is not representative, one for one. If you look at the US Senate alone, every state gets 2 senators that all have loud voices to complain about things like television. But some of these senators, representing states that are very, very small in population, smaller than little towns here in the UK, they have an equal voice to the senator from California, which has a population that rivals most other nations, or New York, which is the same. And so what you get is a lot of senators with big voices who represent far fewer people than the folks who are on the coasts. So really, if you really wanted to measure the outrage, you would probably find that there isn't that much that's outrageous to most of the population. But if you want to measure the volume, you have to see who we're giving the microphone to. And often it's not representative of the entire population. And in fact, the people who live in those unpopulated states, a lot of my family and the people I love, so I'm not being derogatory, but they tend to be more conservative, more religious, and might have more objections to some of the things they see as progressive, but that we see, living on the coast, as just truthful and honest. It's hard in California these days to find a kid who hasn't met an openly LGBT person. So if we don't depict them, we're being dishonest to them. Then there is, and that leads to the next point, which is, then there's the finance of it all, isn't there? What's for sale on television? You are. No, you're for sale to the advertisers. All of your eyeballs. That's what's for sale. And we sell them to the advertisers. Right? And so we have to create content in the United States on television that's going to attract eyeballs. And the most valuable eyeballs are the eyeballs that are setting trends and buying things up, and that's the sort of young demographic, isn't it? And so if we put something on television that doesn't look like their life and their world, they'll turn it off. Forget it. They'll go to some pay station, or they'll go to something in the movies, perhaps. But it's done. It kills the show. The show dies. So that leaves a vacuum, and the people building television have to fill it with what is going to sell, what is going to draw eyes so they can sell to advertisers. But it is true that some of that can be alienating initially to some of the folks in Middle America. My argument is to that we've seen as time has gone on that exposure to people who are different starts to create understanding and acceptance over time. I think one of the most important things and revolutionary things that ever happened on television in the United States was the bravery of a man named John Murray, who was working with someone named Mary Ellis Bunham, who created what was the beginning of reality TV in America, which was a show called The Real World. I don't know if you've heard of it here. But The Real World, he sat and thought, gosh, it's the early 90s. People are dying of AIDS. You ask people now if they've ever met an LGBT person or a gay person, they're going to say, I've at least heard of one. So I can't build a show called The Real World without putting a gay cast member in it. That was revolutionary at the time. And he did that. And as he did that, it began to create understanding with young people who then grew up, who have become a generation of people who are far more accepting because they've come to understand that part of our real world includes people who are very, very different than us. So I think you're right. It probably turned some people off. I've probably lost a lot of viewers in my time by being a bit too confrontational. But I think over time, as long as you're honest about it, as long as you're not coming at them with anger, you're trying to create understanding and doing your best to do that, talking from the heart, I think we can move the culture towards understanding in a positive fashion. It's a great question, though. It's a tough one, isn't it?
Great. I think we've got time for maybe one or two more questions. Yeah, on the second row here.
Hi. You talked a bit about how difficult it was to sort of talk to peers about what you really feel, and if they disagree with you, that's obviously a really hard situation to be in. And recently I found out that actually, especially in Britain, there's sort of been a bit of a regression in people slightly younger than us, and I think they're becoming slightly more conservative. And there's sort of been polls about it, and people seem to be sort of affected by things like Brexit. And I'm just wondering what you think is the most effective way to sort of actually speak to your peers about that and really stand up to your friends even.
Yeah.
I think that is one of the hardest things to do.
At first I thought your question was, it's difficult to talk to peers, as in Morgan. Which I said, of course it is. He's only interested in being right, to make himself feel bigger and better. I'm not even sure if he cares if what he said was right. So that is difficult, but that's also part of the problem. I think I think the greatest thing, what I try to do, and it is a struggle, it is very, very difficult. It's much easier to be right. And if you want to change a mind, you better not come at it with that goal. You better come at it with curiosity, because their belief system is built on something. And so I try my best, and it is difficult, to come at these sort of confrontations with curiosity. I want to know where that came from. And I know I've met people in the UK who voted for Brexit and believe in that, and it's not my position, but I have to come with curiosity. I need to understand where they come from. And that's number one. And if you start to create that space, you can start to create some understanding. And to also know, and I say it to people who are coming out to their parents, know it's not going to necessarily go well at first. Know there's a process. And the most important part of that process is keeping the avenues of communication open. And it is tough. This is tough work. So come at it with curiosity, keep the avenues of communication open, and always, always try to talk out of story and personal experience. I find when you start to go to law, constitutional law, or science, no matter how right you are, people get defensive. That would be my advice. It doesn't always work, but I've found it works more often than not.
Right. And final question, you had one here, Yash.
So just a question about queer activism in general. So there's obviously a tendency among certain activists to portray the decision of being queer as a choice and voluntary choice. And in many ways, I do think that's the case. But there's also a constant contest that other activists would portray it as they're born this way, there's no alternative, and that's why it's so important. So to what extent do you think the queer movement should abandon the born this way narrative and adopt the view that it is an active choice? Or to what extent do you think it is important to keep the narrative that we are born this way? Because ultimately, obviously, you can have a mixture of norms and narratives, but that's probably true. But the way people read or perceive in media is often a very bifurcated or binaristic and simplistic way of understanding queer activism. So how do you think we should reach out to people? Should we go for a choice or born this way narrative?
Well, I think it's different for different people is the simple answer. I think we have very strict black and white we started with very strict definitions of gay or straight, even though we knew that that wasn't true, based on the early studies that even let us know that there were so many LGBT people out there. But for some people, there is no changing it. You are who you are. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's just biology. It might be a combination of biology and experience. We're still discovering all that. What we do find to be true is whatever you are on that spectrum is incredibly difficult to change, right? And for some people who are particularly bisexual, there are choices to be made, more choices to be made. And I don't see anything wrong with that, as long as it doesn't hurt anyone. I don't understand why we all have to feel like in the LGBT community, which is incredibly diverse, very messy, we fight with each other like no other minority, I'm sure, and I love it. It's beautiful. I get in so many Twitter arguments all the time, and I fail at everything I just told you to do, every time. And I try and try again. But that we need to understand that we are that diverse, we are that different, that for some people, who they are is unchangeable. And it does feel very black and white. And for other people, it feels much more gray. And to start to find comfort in that gray area, because that gray area is often, not just in sexuality or gender identity, that gray area is often more truthful than the black and the white. And when we can start to have the patience to understand that, Piers Morgan included, and to not feel insecure because our labels we thought were rock solid are coming down, when we have that patience to create more understanding, I think we're going to be getting closer and closer to the truth without judgment. That would be my goal.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, that is all we've got time for, but I think I speak on behalf of everyone in the audience for saying how humbled we are that you came to share the power of your own personal experience and the power of your personal story with us here today. Hopefully everyone will go and follow your example and continue to try and lead with hope in their communities. So please join me in thanking Dustin for coming to speak here tonight.